Okay, we're going to continue on here in just a minute in our Father's Word. I wanted to go over the almanac a little bit. The 30th is a good day to plant root crops, or the 27th or 25th through the 29th, a good time to plant root crops. Your radish, your turnip, your kohlrabi, onions. Good time to plant the root crops. Turnips. And then is a good time to transplant also, the 27th through the 29th. If you want to transplant collards and cabbage and that kind of plants, broccoli, you can transplant all that stuff the 27th to the 29th, a good time. And then a good time to plant the above ground crops, that starts in December, the 2nd, the 3rd, the 7th, the 8th, and 11th, and 12th, and then get back to the 30th and 31st. Also, you can see Jupiter now, real good. Back to the east, it's down low, and you'll be able to see it. It's real bright. You'll be able to see Jupiter. And Venus, we could still see Venus. Venus is the one, you could look at Venus and see the Atlas comet. And that was real bright. So that's what's happening in the sky right now. It's kind of neat being able to see those planets at the same time. One in the east and one in the west. Okay, now we're going to continue on in the book of Samuel. Now David was the one, that's 1000 BC, 1000 years BC. So that would be 3,000 years ago. King David was there in Israel, called the Bronze Age. Whenever they took copper and they could add tin to this copper. This copper pipe, you can bend it wherever you want to go with it. It bends real easy. See that? It just bends. And copper pipe is like that. So copper's real soft. But they had copper mines. And that's how King Solomon got so rich. Because of the copper mines. The Romans had copper mines south of Jerusalem out in the desert. But they were small mines. They weren't real big. Solomon took and industrialized the copper mines and started producing lots and lots of copper. They found donkey poop with grape seeds in it. And the only place grapes grew were between Jerusalem and the Mediterranean Sea. So that would be to the east of Jerusalem was the only place where the grapevines were. And so that's the only place they could have got the feed for the donkeys. So that's how Solomon was using donkeys to haul the copper from all these great copper mines that he had expanded. And he became rich not with gold. Well, he got lots of gold and silver too. But he really produced a lot of copper, and it was the Bronze Age. And Joseph of Arimathea, the tin man of Glastonbury, England, he owned tin mines there in Glastonbury, England, southern England. So Joseph of Arimathea, the kinsman redeemer of Mother Mary's family, was very, very rich. And you take the tin and you mix it with copper and you make bronze, and made it a real hard arrowhead and hard swords, and so it made their metal a lot harder when you mix the tin with the copper. And so that's why it's called the Bronze Age, and that's when King David and King Solomon were alive. So we're going to read some more about King David, but the thing about King David, he messed up. He's flesh. He's just like the rest of us. We make mistakes, but he never forsake God. King David never forsake God. Yeah. Now Solomon, that's a different story. Solomon built shrines there on the Mount of Olives for his young heathen foreign wives, and they had started to worship. They worship Ishtar, pagan sex and fertility goddess, also called Ashtaroth. And Solomon made shrines on the Mount of Olives, right across from the Ark of the Covenant. The God's got to have a lot of patience. But after Solomon's 40 years, you had King Saul with 40 years as king, and you had King David 40 years. Then you got Solomon for 40 years, about 950 BC. So Solomon, he worshiped the little g gods, and that's the first rule in the Ten Commandments. The first two Ten Commandments is our God is a jealous God, and all he wants you to do is to worship him. So after Solomon, Rehoboam took over Judea, Jerusalem, the Levites, and the Benjamites. And the other 10 tribes were taken over by Jeroboam, who was hiding over in Egypt from Solomon. And Jeroboam took over the 10 northern tribes and built a golden calf for them to worship there in Bethel. And he built another one over in Dan so they wouldn't have to walk so far. So there was 2 golden calves built by Jeroboam to worship Satan. So after Solomon messed up, Israel was split. The 10 northern tribes were run by Jeroboam, and like I said, Benjamin and Judah were run by Rehoboam, Solomon's son. So Solomon was not like King David. And we're reading about King David, but King David messed up a bunch of times, but he never forsake God. And King David wrote the majority of the Psalms, and he was great on the harp and singing and dancing, and he had a big time singing and dancing. We just read about him dancing in the street, took his kingly garments off, was out there in his underwear, singing and dancing and just having a big time out in the street with the people. And it made his wife, Saul's daughter, Michal, it made her really angry at David in her heart. And well, God knew it, and she never conceived or had a baby for King David. King David's son Nathan is in the bloodline of Christ. Solomon, Matthew 1, is in the bloodline of Joseph. Joseph didn't have anything to do with the conception of the Messiah. So Luke 3 tells you the bloodline of Christ, Mother Mary's bloodline, and that's what you got to go by. And Nathan, David's son, is in the bloodline of Christ. Now we're going to continue on here in 2 Samuel. This is chapter 19, verse 37. Let thy servant seek, I pray thee, turn back